We start with what at times seems too bizarre to believe. I'm talking about the presidential campaign coverage so far. From the clown car to the kids' table to leaving Bernie Sanders out, what is going on in the mainstream media? Maybe that's why 40% of young people get their news from programs like The Daily Show and Late Night. Political communication researcher Kristen Landreville joined us for some insight. So how would you describe this early candidate coverage?
Right now we seem to have some frontrunners. We have in the Republican Party, Trump. I just heard in the media yesterday the term Teflon Trump, or Teflon Don, which is really interesting. It seems like that he is a very strong candidate in terms of his style. He's unapologetic. He's very gutsy, and I think people are attracted to that. Some types of people are attracted to that. And then on the other side, you have Hillary and Bernie. And, you know, he didn't get a whole lot of coverage at first, but I think that now that he's doing better in terms of the horse race and the polls, he seems to be getting more mainstream media attention. They're starting to pay a little bit more attention to him rather than just Hillary, the establishment.
Well, the horse race, I'm glad you mentioned that, because for decades, journalists have been telling other journalists, we got to stop covering it like a horse race because the issues aren't being discussed this way. But it seems like things have only gotten worse. What's going on?
Yeah, so in terms of horse race, you are right. I think people complain about it, but nothing has changed in terms of research. I've done research on this topic in the last election in 2012, and horse race was a major theme in that presidential election as well. And I think that is what is, it's very spot news oriented, very breaking news oriented. People have numbers to report, and we tend to like evidence. And I think that the horse race draws people's attention, who's up and who's down, and we kind of like that drama, whereas the issues, the complicated issues, trying to find a middle ground in issues as well is more difficult politics. It's more a difficult political conversation to try to figure out how to best understand our country's issues. And it's just harder to cover as well.
So you're saying that it's easier to do it by just getting the soundbite, but also in Trump's case, perhaps it's something to the effect of, well, if we give him enough rope, he'll hang himself. Like after he denounced McCain as, not a war hero.
Over.
Right.
Yeah. He seems to just, keep on saying what he thinks. And some people tend to really gravitate toward that. Politics is so polished now and seems so orchestrated that I think people really want that gut feeling of a genuine person, that he is raw and unfiltered, and he seems to be strong in his opinions. And in a society where there's a lot of flux and uncertainty right now with our economy, as well as the changing demographics of our nation, we're becoming less white, less male. I think people want some sort of certainty in a candidate, and maybe he's saying things that people are thinking but are too afraid to talk about.
Or fear of change?
Fear of change, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this isn't facilitating a productive democracy. This is not helping the average person know who to vote for.
Yeah, I think some people might think of it as a reality type show. It's fun to watch and there's a lot of drama. What's he going to say next? But I'm a little bit concerned about the political dialogue as well, because he tends to have some disrespectful comments toward other candidates, toward other types of people besides himself. I think that's a concern for people as well, and I'm curious to see how it unfolds as the nomination gets closer. Will people continue to gravitate toward that strong, unfiltered, unapologetic, but yet ruffles everyone's feathers type of person? I don't know.
What do you think is going on with social media? Because the mainstream media is not paying attention to Bernie Sanders, but the social media seems to.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the role that social media is playing this time around?
Well, social media, at least in the last election, was definitely more utilized by the Democratic candidates well. And I think that in general, the social media presence online tends to push more younger, more liberal, more democratic. And so it's interesting that Bernie Sanders has maybe found that that is a strong platform for him to spread his message, because the mainstream media has generally kind of backed off of him and not paid too much attention to him since recently.
What are the issues or the ideas that you're the most curious about during this election?
For me, I'm curious to see how political satire plays out in this election. We have Jon Stewart, who recently stepped down from The Daily Show, and the Colbert Report is no longer on air as well. But now he's in perhaps a more visible position, being in his late show now. So I'm curious to see how these, because my research tends to focus on political satire, how these political satirists are going to deal with someone like Teflon Trump and someone like Hillary and Sanders potentially. I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Well,
yeah.
so far, Colbert has shown Trump as a guilty pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, one more.
And isn't that what reality shows are too? And people don't like to admit they watch reality shows or soap operas, but I mean, I think a guilty pleasure is probably a good term for that, yeah.
Well, these programs like The Late Show and The Daily Show, these are becoming the vehicles for people actually getting their information and their political coverage these days.
They are. And then young people tend to gravitate more toward political satire, as well as liberals too. They tend to appreciate more uncertainty and ambiguity in messages and complexity. So having a political satire that is very open and ambiguous for them to interpret and learn from is something that is attractive toward them. Yeah.
It's been observed that we're becoming more like European media, in that you've got Fox News for,
Yes.
the extreme right, and then you've got the liberal avenues. Seems to me like a good thing, or is it not?
I think it could be a good thing to a certain extent if the focus is not on inflammatory speech. In my mind, there's a nice way to say something and a tactful way to say something, no matter what it is. I think we should have an open dialogue about a lot of the things that Trump is discussing, but I think there's a tactful way, a respectful way to do so. And what concerns me about really partisan news sources, liberal and conservative, is that it's a lot about the anger and the inflammatory speech to try to get people upset enough to engage in a political behavior. And what's interesting is that is what gets people to engage in political behavior, is emotion, anxiety, anger, and worry get people to participate in the political process, more so than hope and happiness. Which, if you think about it, makes sense. When, the fight or flight systems in our brain, we are going to react when something approaches us. And so it's interesting how politics and emotion can play like that.
Dr. Landreville, as things play out, we'll have to have you come back.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me, Mary.
You betcha.